In the last time I talked, I was talking about what. What is it that we are actually delivering? In this last session, I want to talk about why. Why is there such variation in practice? And to give us some insights into that, we correlated the design findings against a series of factors, some of which were market factors relating to the market opportunity, what will the market support locally, how do house builders operate, a range of contextual factors to do with the nature of the site and the surroundings, and design governance factors. What are the tools that are being used by local authorities to shape different design responses in different places and how effective they are? Starting with the question of affluence and how that relates to design. Now, we used, to look at this element, we looked at the ACON consumer classification and correlated that directly with our design outcomes. And if you know the ACON classification, it classifies every postcode in the country on a scale from urban adversity to affluent achievers, which says something about how affluent we are in any part of the country. What we see is that poorly designed schemes in our audit are 10 times more likely to be built in the least affluent areas than in the affluent ones. And well-designed schemes are 4 times more likely to be built in the affluent areas than in the least affluent ones. The only elements that perhaps escape that to some degree are community facilities and public transport, which scored much better it didn't score better than the affluent areas, but scored better than other elements in the least affluent areas. And of course, there are schemes that break the pattern. Poor quality schemes in affluent areas that we found in our audit, and of course very good quality schemes in less affluent areas. And in almost anything we looked at, there is the majority of schemes that point in a particular direction, and then there are those outliers that show it is possible to achieve things even in more difficult circumstances. When the design audit schemes were compared to the market value, we used data from Zoopla's Z-index, which records average sale prices in postcodes, different postcodes around the country. And when we did that, there's a very obvious correlation between house price and the design quality that we are seeing in the housing developments. Better designed schemes achieve higher sales values. And when we look across the whole of the 142 schemes, there was on average a 75% uplift between the poor and the very good quality schemes in terms of their market value. And we see this pattern in every region across the country. Why is this? Well, various answers might be found to that particular question. One possible answer is that the resource available to design in different contexts, in very simple terms, if the development value goes up, then the funding available both to design, to hire professionals, and to deliver enhanced outcomes also tends to rise. So that might be one explanation. There's also lots of research that suggests that design quality leads to premium sales value. If you design better, then you get a better market return, essentially. Premium markets, some research suggests, require better design because within those markets, it's more of a differentiator in the market. There's less products to choose from, those consumers have greater choice, and therefore design becomes a more important factor. But purchasers also have less choice in other markets, non-premium markets. So design perhaps is not prioritised. If you don't have much choice in terms of what you buy, there's one product on the market, then you buy that or you don't buy anything. So there's a range of explanations that might play into this. And of course, house builders reflect some of these issues within their own business models. Some outwardly, the point here is that it could be all of the above. Some house builders reflect this in their business models, and others clearly not so much in terms of prioritising design. Can low-value areas achieve good quality design then in these sorts of circumstances? Well, the simple answer is yes. If we look at the outlying schemes shown on the average sale price against design audit chart, then the results indicate that schemes with low market value can achieve good and very good design outcomes. There were examples that we came across. And high-value schemes sometimes deliver only mediocre and poor quality design outcomes. That said, it's frequently argued that in parts of the country where values are low, there's simply insufficient resources available to invest in good design. This is an argument you hear fairly commonly. Despite that, research from LABC Warranty records that return on investment for a house builder is often largest away from those parts of the country with the highest land values, because those land values eat into the return on investment. When we correlated those regions that were scoring best and worst against those returns on investment, what you find is really no correlation at all between design quality and those returns on investment. Perhaps this is because if land values are low, that does not necessarily mean that good design cannot be afforded. There are plenty of examples where good design has been afforded in those more challenging contexts, and we pick some of them up in the case studies in our report. Also, the cost differential between a well and a poorly designed scheme is only one relatively small part of the gross development value. If you've got to deliver roads and you've got to deliver lighting and you've got to deliver this and you've got to deliver that, then you've got to deliver it anyway. The difference between good and bad is not necessarily going to cost you a lot of money in terms of making that real difference. When we look at developer practices, well, the practices and priorities and inconsistencies within and between house builders have a significant impact on design quality. For the 10 developers that had 3 or more schemes audited, the scores varied right across the audit scale. 4 of those 10 that we audited more schemes for were in the poor category. They were below the 3 mark. And only 1 was above 4. The top 4 by audited volume, this isn't necessarily the top 4 in the country, this is the top 4 by audited volume, show typically varied profiles, where the same developers in different places are producing sometimes some really excellent schemes and sometimes some very, very poor schemes. The same developers producing a range of different outcomes. Certainly when we correlated against developers with a known sort of corporate emphasis on design, without naming any names, what you find is that those developers generally return higher design scores. Those which are organised regionally exhibited significant variation across their regions. So some regions, for some of the largest developers, are producing very good stuff. Other regions are not producing such good design. Turning to some of the contextual factors that we looked at. Firstly, urbanity. We used the 2011 census data which scores different parts of the country according to whether you're in an urban, suburban or rural area. and we correlated those with our design outcomes. What we saw is progressively worse design scores as projects moved away from the urban core. Over half of schemes in a rural setting were poor. Just 3 of our urban schemes fell into that category. The report concludes, we seem unable to design well in what the old Essex Design Guide used to call landscape-dominating environments. The second contextual factor was density. We used 2 measures of density. One was dwelling density and the other was people density. Both pretty much showed us the same sorts of results when we correlated them with design. Namely, a positive correlation between better design and higher densities. Although, like in all of these cases, there were schemes that broke that pattern. We did see some poor quality high density schemes and some very good quality low density schemes within the sample. What was clear though was that from very good down to very poor, you see a descending profile in terms of density. Our average for very good schemes was 56 dwellings per hectare. So not high density, but a sort of medium density, if you like. Going down to very poor at an average of 25 dwellings per hectare. The average density in the audit was 37, solidly mediocre. The average current density being built in the UK is apparently 31 dwellings per hectare, more or less what we were scoring for poor schemes. Then if we looked at site history, this really looks at whether sites have been previously developed or not. What we see is better design is often, although not always, associated with building on reused sites, typically in already built up areas. The report concludes that the additional constraints imposed by a pre-existing urban context, established infrastructure, heritage, street network, seem to encourage a more walkable type of urbanisation. And that greenfield schemes fail to exploit the potential advantages that they have of a greener landscape setting, more room for things like open space and play spaces, and often a more direct link with a local vernacular. They often fail to really exploit those potential advantages that they may have. Next, we looked at tools of design governance. We looked at a range of different tools, from pre-application discussions to different types of design policy and neighbourhood plans in particular. The government guidance that is referenced there is all largely withdrawn guides, such as by design, rather than the recent National Design Guide, which hadn't come out at the time of the audit. What we found is that all types of design governance tools help to deliver better design outcomes. It's better to have them and to use them than not to use them. But that impact varies considerably between the types of tools that different developments were associated with. The most effective by far are those site-specific or place-specific tools, design codes and processes of design review that focus on particular schemes and get design capacity working on those schemes. Respectively, almost 5 and 4 times schemes that use design codes and design review were respectively almost 5 or 4 times more likely to be associated with good or very good than poor or very poor quality development. Of course, they require a skills input. That carries a cost, and sometimes that can be a barrier. When we looked at that cost, we looked at the average cost of a design review, reflecting back on previous research we did in Place Alliance, and what you see is a tiny, tiny percentage of the gross development value of the projects that we were measuring in our audit. Also impactful were some other more generic tools. Manual for Streets came out as being impactful, and so did Building for Life 12, respectively almost 2.5 and 2 times more likely to be associated with good and very good rather than poor and very poor schemes. Interestingly, Greater London came out as the heaviest user of design codes and design review and was right at the top of regions delivering on design quality. The East Midlands was the lightest user of both design codes and design review and came out at the bottom of the scale. For their part, the case studies that we undertook revealed some key issues around the consistency with which design aspirations are being delivered. Notably, that design quality is sometimes set aside at the appeal stage, in the interest of boosting housing delivery. That frequently schemes over time seem to be watered down through successive phases of development. Start off with great ambitions, but that waters down through time. And often schemes are undermined for many years through the phasing strategy. That not everything, of course, can be delivered on day one through a phasing strategy, but the way schemes are phased actually seems to completely undermine the quality of the place for many years during that development process. Finally, the research looked at resident and community views. It noted overwhelming satisfaction amongst new residents with the developments that they were located in, although that reduced somewhat in poor and very poor performing schemes. And a great contrast with the Place Alliance recent research looking at community views as represented through 1,200 local councillors who had a quite different perspective on whether they were satisfied with recent developments in their area or not. When asked about the things that they liked, residents picked out quietness, green space, sense of community, play facilities as the top factors that they liked about the places. All factors that you would associate with the sorts of suburban environments that dominated the audits and that consequently dominate the output of our volume builders. When asked about dislikes, we saw sort of 3 groups of factors, I suppose. Those associated with cars and roads, and particularly parking. Parking is always the big problem, and that came out very dominant. But then a set of concerns around the poor quality of some green spaces and play areas in developments, and another set of factors around the sort of isolation of many key facilities and amenities within developments. All of these concerns focus on some of the downsides, I suppose, of living in a more disconnected, car-dominated sort of environment. Local councillors in our related research largely agreed they saw problems in parking, poor access to facilities, traffic safety, but also alongside questions of character and the loss of character in local areas as they saw it. For some house builders, as long as there's a ready market for poor quality design and they can continue to deliver their products through the planning system, then perhaps there's little incentive to improve. For some planning authorities, the short-term imperative to deliver new housing may continue to trump the long-term negative impact of the sorts of environments that we are building. For some highways authorities, the very notion of good placemaking is as yet simply not on the radar. Collectively, the results of the audit show that we need to significantly raise our game if we're to create the sorts of places that future generations will feel proud to call home. And to do that, we need to climb those steps that I referred to earlier. Some of them we are doing so already, but many of them we're just not getting anywhere near to addressing those sorts of qualities. We're failing to move beyond what Cabe, 15 or so years ago, called the unflattering and uncompromising picture of housing development in England. The report concluded the need is to somehow address the things that communities, including recent buyers of new homes, dislike, whilst not losing sight of those things that they like. That, of course, is not easy to do. There's a balance to be struck, although higher scoring schemes audited in the report demonstrate that it is not only possible to deliver good design, but it's possible to deliver it everywhere: rich, poor, urban, suburban, rural, north, south, east and west. Thank you.